everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I'm Punal Shah. I should be using the clicker actually. It's quite weird being able to do this in person. So here we go. I'm Punal Shah. So I'm Director of Strategic Services at Optimove. And with me I've got Anjli Gohil, who's our Strategic Services Team Leader. And today what we're going to be doing is taking you through a little bit more about CRM Contribution. I should know that. We've been talking about this presentation this whole time. So what we're going to do is tell you a bit more about how we define this, what we use to actually help you understand what your CRM is worth, and also ways in which we can improve it. So a little bit more about why we're able to be over here talking to you today. So we've been around for almost a decade, but what we do during this time is talk to over 500 different global brands to telling them and helping them understand how they can scale their CRM. So we've been recognized as a leader by Forrester and also Gartner Challenger. But within this, we're talking to brands across different industries. And the objective of what we do at a high level is basically a multi-channel marketing orchestration platform. So a few words there to kind of break down. So what we want to do is help brands understand their customer lifetime value. And within this, actually, it's all about talking to the right customer at the right time and sharing the right message. And the way we do this quite well is through these three-pronged approach on the right-hand side, the high-level solution. So number one, we've got easy access to data through our CDP. Number two, we want to take that data and use that to actually migrate across to bespoke and personalized targeted marketing that can be delivered through our multi-channel marketing hub. And then the third level of it is actually combining that together through our AI and machine learning. So what we're trying to do is help people understand performance and try to relate that back to the contribution from a CRM perspective. So today, as part of the CRM contribution, we'll share a little bit more about the motivation. What is going to be the North Star metric that's actually going to help you understand what is your CRM contribution? Next, we'll go in a little bit more about breaking down what CRM contribution is and defining that by its key components. And then Anjli will also talk to you a little bit more about some of the industry research that we've done to help you understand what is it that we can relate to a benchmark. And from this, we're going to see how you can probably look to see where your CRM stacks up against this. And at the end, we've got a few key factors where we've seen successful CRM contribution across different businesses, and we're going to help share those factors with you today. So one of the things that we want to do from a motivation perspective is actually share, and a business question that we regularly get asked is, how do I know what my campaigns are worth? So as smart marketers, we want to know what's the value that's being driven by our marketing strategy and driven to the company as well. But being able to show that in the right way is actually the essence of what we want to do. How do you measure and gauge your CRM contribution? And that can be quite challenging. So today we're going to help you understand that. We're going to break that down into different parts, and we're going to help you understand how better to measure your campaign performance, and also to attribute your success to CRM marketing efforts as well. So the first part that we always look for is actually what is our North Star. So from a CRM perspective, what we want to do is make sure that the entire organization is following this North Star metric. And once you've been able to identify this, it's taking that long-term metric and actually breaking it down into thinking, what is the way you're going to continuously monitor it? And then the second part of it is, how do you actually increase that as well? So first of all, to decide on the North Star, you think about the way to measure your value and also about your marketing efforts. So what we want to do is explore what this is going to be. But if I go back a little bit in terms of marketing languages and where we've been talking to marketing teams before, some of the things that they actually talk about and historically is about using attribution models such as related to acquisition. So it's talking about first click, last click, and it's also talking about the fractional models as well. And within this, what we're trying to see is that not everyone can actually measure that in the way from a first click, last click. So if you think about iOS 15 and what's happening there, we're actually going to see that the ability to actually attribute and connect to your last opens is going to be very difficult to measure. So what we want to do is start to focus a little bit more about how to relate that back to a metric that's relevant for us. So a quick poll, a show of hands, please, if your North Star metric, if you have one or if you're focusing on from your business, relates to A, B, C, or D. So does anyone have A, B, C, or D as a North Star metric? I see a few hands. All right, keep your hands raised if revenue is that North Star metric for you. All right, great for us because the rest of the presentation is going to be talking about revenue. And actually, that's actually what we work with most of our clients about as well. So across the last 18 months and the way that we've worked with clients, one of the things that we seem to understand is that customers and consumers have become more sophisticated. So what we're seeing over here is that they're not afraid to try new things, and therefore, from an acquisition point of view, the cost per acquisition is increasing as well significantly. So what we want to try to do is break that down a bit more and actually understand how can we be more effective with our existing customers as well? How do we actually focus our efforts towards the new customers rather than new customers, just acquiring and relating back to our existing customer database? And if we relate this back to CRM contribution, what we want to do is find that metric, such as revenue, that's going to help us tell us what's working well. So breaking down CRM contribution a bit, we define this as the total amount of statistically significant revenue, revenue being total gross amount or order amount, and that's based on revenue uplift that's generated through campaigns that you're running. But we want to break that down from the campaigns that you're running as a proportion of your total turnover as well. So within this, incrementality plays a very important role. So as mentioned before, your first click, last click, and very other attribution models along that can play an important role for taking credit for all the customer journeys and the transactions there. But we want to actually share a little bit more about why test and control is a great way to help to synergize across the board to understand whether or not your marketing efforts are playing a strong component in that as well. So in order to do this, we're going to measure the incremental growth, and these next few slides are going to talk a little bit more about how we can bring this to life. So we're going to measure the incremental growth, and we're going to think about that as being the incremental uplift. We're going to adopt a scientific approach to this, and we're going to have each individual campaign be an experiment within that. So each control group is going to be a smaller cohort of customers that you want to not send a marketing campaign to. But the larger proportion of customers that you do send a campaign to, that's going to be a test group over here. So in this example, we've got 120 customers who are part of the test group that are going to be receiving campaigns. A small subset of 40 will not be receiving the campaign. We want to measure from a revenue point of view and a response point of view what's been happening between these two test and control groups. So from a response rate, we can see that there's been a response rate for the test group of 25%, whereas it's 10% on the control group. And the average revenue is different between your test and control as well. So you see a £10 higher average revenue for your test group. To then measure that, to actually summate it for your revenue calculation, if you multiply the customers by your response rate by the average revenue, you'll be able to see that the test group have £1,800 of total revenue and £200 for the control group. So your total campaign revenue is $2,000. Now, that's the revenue part of it. We want to break this down to the next component, which is the uplift part. So if we take the actual revenue that we've generated, which is the £2,000, we want to see if we simulated the same journey for the control group that will happen for the test group as well, what would be the revenue that we'd have there? So what that means is the £200 that we got from the control group is the static that we've got, but the 10% response as well as the £50 on average revenue is what we would get for the 120 customers as well. So if we sum that together, that's the equivalent of what our control simulation is. So if we minus the 800 from the £2,000, this is where we would get our campaign new uplift in this instance. However, imagine taking all of the campaigns that you've run across a single moment in time, in a week, in a month. We then can combine that together. So if we take £1,200 and we ran it for 5 campaigns and they all delivered the same revenue campaign uplift, that would be £6,000. We take that £6,000 and we actually total that and compare that as a proportion of your actual total revenue. So if your total revenue was £60,000, it'd be 6,000 divided by your 60,000, and that's essentially the 10% CRM contribution that you'd be getting. There are a lot of slides in this where we've got charts. This is the only one that's got pure words in there, so bear with me. But I'm going to break this down into 2 quick sentences. Number 1, test and control is very important. It's one thing that we want to make sure that we can actually compare groups rather than actually just attributing success to one single way of working. And then the second part of that is making sure that we're looking at a response rate or revenue or whatever your North Star metric is, and we're comparing that as being part of the test and control groups, and we make sure we attribute it as calculations to both as well to generate uplifts. The last slide before I pass over to Anjli is just to share with you a use case that we've had with a client of ours. So in this example, we basically had client test, and hopefully you can see the numbers, maybe not from the back at the moment, but I'll kind of break it down. So we've got test and control, and within those test and control, we can see the significant proportion of customers are under your test. So there's 1.7 million there versus 138,000 under the control group. Now, within this, we can see at the very bottom over here, the average net order amount is the same for both groups, $53 in this instance. But where we wanted to bring this back is actually seeing the statistical significance of either response or order amount. And over here, we can see that the response rate is actually 7.5% higher for your test group versus your control group. So with that being said, we're able to do the same calculations that we had done in the previous couple of slides. And this is where we've been able to find $34,000 of uplift actually for our client. This is great because if we take this by calculation step by step for each of the campaigns that we run, and we've got campaigns being run from 30 plus to 100 plus in a given week by clients, we can then use that as part of a total turnover in a given week in a given month. The more granular you get within this CRM contribution view, as well as statistical significance, you're able to then think about how do I impact my customers more as well. So in this second example over here, we've actually broken it down by different channels. So you may not be able to read because it's quite faint on the slide, but this is preferred channel test and control. So we've got control and test done by store, by web, and by web and store as well. And in this example over here, we can see that for each of the order amounts, that there is a higher statistical significance across all of these channels as well. So just to kind of recap where we've taken you through the first portion, it's making sure that there's a North Star and publicizing that across the company. Number two, being able to calculate that through uplift. And then the third part of that is actually using that to generate your CRM contribution and using that to then think about how to move forward with further campaigns. So I'm going to pass over to Anjli, who's going to be talking to a little bit more about the work that we've done with other businesses.
Thank you. Hello? Can you hear me? Great. All right. So as previously mentioned, we want marketers to look for their North Star metric, and in Optimove, we believe that the CRM contribution is a good metric to use for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we're not just looking at the monetary value that's attributed to your CRM, we're comparing this to the overall revenue that's generated within your company. So this ratio is good to compare over time, especially if you're going through a growth phase. Secondly, it's a good metric to use as an industry benchmark. As this metric, as I said, is reflected as a proportion, it's comparable across clients of all sizes. So what we're doing here is eliminating the bias of clients or companies that generate a larger revenue and will skew the overall results. So in this section, we have conducted some research to understand what is the current state of the CRM contribution, and to provide some stats and benchmarks for you to take away, compare yourselves to, and even to identify ways to increase your CRM contribution. Now, in order for the results to be credible and to ensure stability in the data, we made some exclusions in our data set. Firstly, we looked at clients within Optimove that have launched for at least 6 months, as they're more likely to be in a steady state. Secondly, we excluded small clients that generate a lower revenue. We tend to see more volatility in their CRM contribution, and therefore we wanted to exclude them from our analyses. Thirdly, we looked at our clients' coverage rates. So a coverage rate is the proportion of customers that are targeted with a campaign on a weekly basis. So here we wanted to exclude clients that do not use Optimove to its fullest potential and are reaching out to a small proportion of their base. We see it tends to affect the CRM contribution. And lastly, and most importantly, we looked at our clients' campaigns and the proportion that are set up as test and control. Without control group, you can't measure the success of a campaign and therefore the true CRM contribution. So we also eliminated clients that if less than 33% of their campaigns are set up as test and control. So that's some context about who we've included. So for those who are eligible to be part of this research, we found that 10% of their revenue is attributed to their CRM activities. And when specifically focusing on our top 10% customers in terms of CRM contribution, we found that they attributed 33% of their revenue to their CRM activities, which is a great achievement. So here are the specific results. We just spoke about our top performing clients that generate a CRM contribution of 33%. In the second decile, we also see a good CRM contribution of 18% on average. And then, of course, the average drops further down this chart. So here we can gain a good understanding of the current state of the CRM contribution, and it's something that we can compare over time. And of course, you can compare yourselves to. Now, to take this research to a step further, we wanted to understand what are the clients on the left doing differently and better, and how can the clients on the right be more like them and increase their CRM contribution. So what we did was run an algorithm to understand what are the features and attributes that strongly correlate with CRM contribution, so that we can firstly explain the differences between high and low performing clients, and also identify ways to increase your CRM contribution. So in this part of the research, we looked at a sample of 100 clients who joined Optimove in the last 5 years. So we wanted to look at a more relevant data set. They also meet the criteria that we discussed earlier. So they generate larger revenue compared to other clients. They have a good proportion of test control campaigns and good coverage rates. And in this analysis, we wanted to specifically focus on our clients' performance in the first year since joining Optimove to avoid or exclude maturity as a factor that can influence results. And lastly, to explain the differences between high and low performing clients, we split our data set into two. So we compared our top 20% clients in terms of CRM contribution and compared them to the remaining 80% in the data set. So overall, we found that there were 3 KPIs that could explain the differences between high and low performing clients, and is strongly correlated to CRM contribution. So the first one is customer coverage. As previously mentioned, this is the proportion of customers that are targeted with a campaign on a weekly basis. Just to provide some context, on the x-axis, we have the number of months from the go-live date with Optimove, and on the y-axis, we have the coverage rates. And in the chart, the green line represents our top 20% clients in terms of CRM contribution, and in pink, we have the remaining 80%. So from this chart, we can see that in the first month after the go-live date, we can see both groups performing similarly. However, in the second month, our top 20% clients reached almost 50% coverage of their base, whereas the remaining 80% reached around 12% of their base. And across the entire year, we can see that there's a gap between both groups, which largely remained the same. We then fine-tuned this metric to look at the live customer coverage. So this is the proportion of customers that are targeted with a campaign, but amongst your live or active base. So from this data, we can see that our top 20% clients consistently outperformed the remaining 80 when looking at the live customer coverage. So a couple of nuggets for you to take away. The first one is 3 months after the go-live date, our top 20% clients reached almost 70% of their live base. And secondly, we can see that after 6 months, this metric stabilized around the 80% mark. So those are a few figures, or a couple of figures for you to take away and compare yourselves to. So a couple of takeaways here. The first one is to maximize reach amongst your live base. As we can see, leads to higher CRM contribution. If customers are not eligible to receive communications via your main execution channels, then think about what are some of the other channels you can leverage to maximize reach, whether that's with existing channels or channels that you plan to have in the future. Secondly, this means to focus on proactively retaining customers rather than reactivating them later. From working with our clients, we know it's more expensive and more difficult to achieve. So that's the first KPI that strongly correlates with a CRM contribution. The second one is number of channels that are used in a campaign on a weekly basis. So in the beginning, we can see that both groups performed similarly. And then after 4 months, our top 20% clients consistently outperformed the remaining 80% when it comes to setting up multi-channel campaigns. Specifically, we can see that after 5 months from the go live date, our top 20% clients started to use a second channel in their campaigns. So after the end of the first year, we can see that our best performing clients use 2.6 channels on average, and our low performing clients just scratch the surface of using a second channel. So overall, we know that having more channels gives us the ability to better engage with customers, and it also increases the probability of engaging with customers via the preferred channel. But as we saw in the previous slide, can also lead to higher CRM contribution. So the main takeaway here is to set up more multi-channel campaigns to improve customer engagement and also to increase or maximize the revenue or your North Star metric that's generated from your campaigns. The last KPI we'll be speaking about is the number of target groups. So these are the different audiences you're communicating with on a weekly basis. So in the second month, we can see that our top 20% clients reached around 75 different audiences with different communications, whereas the remaining 80% reached around 15 to 20 different target groups. So over time, we can see that the gap between both groups is widening, especially after the 10-month mark. So overall, we do encourage our customers to be more granular to increase personalization. And when it comes to granularity, the sky is the limit. So a few takeaways here. The first one is to build more granular segmentation. The smaller your group sizes are, the more personalized you can be. And we've seen this from clients. This does result in customers responding better to your campaigns. Secondly, being more granular is a gradual, iterative process. We don't expect you to build 100 target groups in one day. As we saw trends from the previous slide amongst our best performing clients, it's a gradual process. They reached around 200 different audiences by the end of the year, which is a great achievement. Lastly, leverage past campaign results to understand where further segmentation is needed. So one thing that you can do is think about or look into which campaigns are performing well amongst a specific group of customers in your target groups. If your campaigns are performing better for that specific group, you can target the remaining customers in your target groups with a different communication to maximize the revenue or your North Star metric that's generated from your campaigns. Now, within Optimove specifically, our top 20% clients effectively use our AI feature, which is called OptiBot, which continuously scans our clients' marketing activities to identify areas for improvement, ways to maximize the uplift that's generated from their campaigns, and therefore increase CRM contribution. So overall, the suggestion here is, and we encourage you to further understand where the segmentation is needed. Where do we need further segmentation to optimize your CRM? So just to summarize today's session, there are 3 main takeaways. The first one is to find your North Star metric. We know that every marketing team should have a good metric to monitor over time and represent the success of their marketing organization. The second one is to value incrementality. So treat every customer interaction as an experiment using the test and control method. And then use incrementality to measure success and therefore the CRM contribution. Now, we understand that it doesn't make sense to include a control group in every single campaign. For example, if you want to send out a welcome email to every single customer, but we do encourage testing wherever you can. So in this specific use case, we would recommend an A/B test, setting up that. The last takeaway is all small wins truly add up. We don't expect you to double your CRM contribution in one day. Continuously move the needle by building granular segmentation, increasing reach amongst your live base, and thirdly, increasing the number of channels used within your campaigns to improve engagement. Thank you. Thank you.